Rain hammered the cracked pavement outside the Mirage diner, each drop hitting like a tiny fist against glass. The neon open sign flickered red-blue-red against the downpour, casting ghosts of light across the empty street. Sofia Sinclair pushed through the glass door, her grease-stained uniform clinging to her thin frame, black sneakers squeaking on the wet concrete. The summer storm had turned the city into a drowning place, and she moved through it like she had learned long ago how to disappear into weather. She did not see the black Mercedes idling 3 storefronts down the street. The engine purred beneath the sound of the rain, barely audible, patient as a hunting animal. Inside that car, in the back seat behind windows tinted dark as oil, sat Giovanni Calabrese. He was still in the way that powerful men are still, not the stillness of peace but the stillness of a predator calculating distance. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored to shoulders that carried the weight of an empire built on fear and loyalty. His hands rested on his thighs, palms up, and a gold watch caught the dashboard light like a cold eye. He had been watching Sofia Sinclair for 3 months. Every morning when she arrived at the estate to clean his floors in her black and white uniform, every afternoon when she emptied the trash cans in his study, every evening when she disappeared into the staff quarters at the back of the mansion. He had never truly looked at her face until tonight. "Follow her," he said to Bruno in the driver's seat, his voice deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. "Keep distance. No one knows about this except you." Bruno nodded once and pulled into traffic, keeping 4 car lengths between them. Sofia's right hand clutched her ribcage as she walked, and even from 40 feet away, even through the rain-streaked window, Giovanni could see the way her body moved, wrong, broken, favoring her left side like a wing that could not bear weight. She stopped under a broken street lamp on Fremont Street, leaned against the pole, and tilted her head back. The rain fell on her face and washed across closed eyes, and for a moment she looked like she was trying to drown herself standing up. Then she pulled something from her pocket. A letter, crumpled, water-soaked, the envelope stamped with red letters that screamed final notice. Sofia stared at it with the hollow eyes of someone who had calculated her own disappearance and found the numbers impossible. Her shoulders began to shake. Not from cold. From the kind of despair that makes people evaporate. Giovanni leaned forward. "Stop the car." They pulled to the curb, engine idling, and he watched her stand there in the rain with that letter in her trembling hands. He could not read the words from this distance, but he could read the surrender in her spine, the way her knees were slowly bending like they were tired of holding her up. She would collapse within minutes if no one moved toward her. He could see it. The body always told the truth. "What are we doing?" Bruno asked quietly from the driver's seat. "We are waiting," Giovanni said. But what he did not know was that this moment, this exact moment of him watching her break in the rain, would rewrite every decision he would make for the rest of his life. And Sofia did not know that the man in the Mercedes had already made his choice the moment Emma, his 7-year-old daughter, had whispered at bedtime 3 weeks ago, "Papa, there was a nice lady at the park. She stayed with me when I fell off the climbing structure. She didn't know who I was. She just stayed." Now Sofia sank to the wet pavement, still gripping that letter, and her body folded in on itself like a paper doll in the rain. Giovanni opened the car door. 6 hours earlier, Sofia had stood in her small room in the staff quarters of the Calabrese Estate and counted the money in her pocket. $5. That was all. 5 individual ones, folded small, soft from being held and recounted 1,000 times. She placed them on the narrow bed beside her pillow and stared at the final notice letter that had arrived 3 days ago. $35,000 in 72 hours, or the hospital would begin collection proceedings against her mother's medical debt. 35,000. The number was not real. It was a hallucination, a mathematical proof that the universe was rigged against people like her. Her mother had spent 6 weeks in intensive care after the car accident. The hospital bills had arrived one after another, each envelope thicker than the last, each number growing like a cancer. No insurance. No way to pay. Just a mounting debt that accumulated interest like a curse that would not lift. Sofia's hands were calloused from work, the cleaning supplies at the estate, the grease at the diner, the endless hours of scrubbing and serving and remaining invisible. She looked at her palms and saw the map of her own erasure, line by line, scar by scar. At 7 in the morning, she had worked for hours in the Calabrese mansion, moving through rooms so vast they echoed with emptiness. Mrs. Calabrese had died years ago, that was all she knew. The man who owned the estate moved through his life like a ghost who was still learning how to haunt. Sofia had swept marble floors until her knees ached. She had polished silver that belonged to no one she knew. She had arranged flowers in vases and changed sheets on beds where no one slept. She was a shadow, and shadows do not ask questions. "You are still here." A girl's voice, small and bright. Sofia turned to find Emma Calabrese standing in the hallway, a child of 7 with her father's dark eyes and skin the color of honey. "I am cleaning, Miss Emma," Sofia said quietly. "What is your name?" "Sofia." "Do you have a little girl at home?" Sofia hesitated. She had lost her daughter 7 years ago, pneumonia, 3 days of fever, and then nothing. The hospital had called it an infection, but Sofia had called it the cost of being poor in a rich world. She could not afford the medicine. By the time she had found a way to pay, it was too late. "No, Miss Emma," Sofia whispered. "I do not have a little girl." Emma frowned, as if this was incorrect information that needed to be reported to the proper authorities. Then she took Sofia's hand, so small it nearly disappeared against Sofia's palm, and said, "You can be my friend. I have many toys. You can sit with me during lunch." Sofia's throat closed. She gently pulled her hand away. "That is not allowed, Miss Emma. I am the maid." The girl's face crumpled. She turned and walked away, her shoes clicking against the marble. Sofia had finished the shift and left the estate at noon. By evening, she was at the Mirage Diner, lacing her apron around her waist, preparing for the night shift that would last until 3 in the morning. This was the job that kept her barely alive, 8 hours on her feet, carrying plates, clearing tables, smiling at men who looked through her like she was made of glass. Douglas Hale owned the diner with a silent partner whose name Sofia had never heard. Douglas was 43, with a kind of face that looked like it had been corroded by cruelty, and his hands were always too close to her shoulders, his voice always pitched just low enough that only she could hear it. "You owe me rent, beautiful," he had whispered an hour ago, his palm sliding down her arm. "The bedroom or the kitchen? Your choice. But you are going to pay what you owe me." Sofia had pulled away and walked to table 7 to take an order. Her right side ached where his grip had been. By the time she finished her shift, the bruise would be blooming beneath her ribs like a flower growing in the dark. Now she stood under the broken street lamp in the rain with a letter in her hands that might as well have been a knife, and she could not find a single reason to move forward into the next breath. The rain fell. The neon sign flickered. And the black Mercedes pulled up to the curb just as her knees gave way. Giovanni Calabrese stepped out into the storm. He was tall, 6'2" at least, and the cashmere coat he wore was the color of smoke and probably worth more than Sofia's entire annual earnings. His dark hair was wet now, plastered to his forehead, and his eyes were the gray of a sky before a storm rolls in. There was a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, thin and pale, like a blade had once tried to cut through his face and had only half succeeded. He moved toward her without hurrying, each step deliberate and controlled, and Sofia's body jerked backward like she had been caught stealing. "Do not move," he said. His voice was quiet enough that she had to lean in to hear it over the rain. She froze. Her legs would not work anyway. He knelt down, actually knelt, his expensive suit pressing against wet pavement, and looked at the letter in her hands. Then he looked at her face, at the black eye Douglas Hale had left her with 2 weeks ago, now faded to yellow-green around the edges. He saw the bruises on her neck forming like fingerprints. He saw the cut on her lip that was still healing. His jaw tightened. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest. "What is your name?" he asked. "Sofia Sinclair," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, like a candle in the wind. "I clean your house." "I know who you are," he said. My daughter speaks of you constantly. Sofia felt something fracture inside her. Emma. The beautiful child who had tried to befriend her, to give her toys and companionship, and the one thing Sofia had lost forever. Giovanni took the letter from her trembling hands. He did not read it, he already knew what it would say. He had seen this before, 1,000 times, in 1,000 faces. The look of someone standing at the edge of an abyss and preparing to jump. Come with me, he said. I cannot, Sofia said. I do not know you. You clean my house. You are kind to my daughter when no one tells you to be. That is all I need to know. He stood and extended his hand. Come. Before this storm gets worse. She should have run. She should have vanished into the rain and never looked back. But Emma's small face kept appearing in her mind, and the hand in front of her was warm and solid and offering something that looked like salvation, even though she knew better than to believe in such things. Sofia took his hand. Giovanni pulled her to her feet and guided her toward the Mercedes, where Bruno was waiting with the door open. She climbed inside, soaking wet, trembling, and Giovanni sat beside her while rain hammered the windows and the city blurred past like a dream she was having while drowning. What is in the letter? He asked quietly. Sofia could not speak. The number was too heavy. Tell me, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her obey. $35,000, she whispered. In 3 days. Or my mother loses her house. Giovanni was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something to Bruno in Italian, and Bruno nodded without taking his eyes from the road. You will not go back to that diner, Giovanni said. You will not go back to that man. That man has made a mistake, and he will spend the rest of his life regretting it. Sofia wanted to laugh, to tell him he did not understand how the world worked. Men like Douglas Hale did not face consequences. Men like Douglas Hale kept doing what they did because no one stopped them. But she was so tired, and his voice was so steady, and she was sitting in a car that smelled like expensive leather and safety, and maybe, just maybe, she could believe him for one night. The rain kept falling. And somewhere in the mansion on the hill, Emma Calabrese was dreaming about the kind lady who had stayed with her when she fell, never knowing that her father was about to change the course of her life forever. The alarm on Sofia Sinclair's phone did not ring. It vibrated, a small angry buzz against the cinder block wall at 3:22 in the morning, and she opened her eyes in the darkness of the staff quarters like someone waking from a nightmare she could not escape. The room was a converted storage closet on the basement level of the Calabrese Estate, walls painted institutional grey, one small window facing the trash bins outside. A twin mattress on a metal frame. A plastic nightstand. A wire hanger holding her black and white maid uniform, pressed and waiting, the shoes polished and lined up beneath like a soldier at attention. On that nightstand sat the envelope. The letter inside bore the stamped final notice in reading that looked like blood. Sofia did not open it again. She had memorized every word. $35,000. Due in 72 hours. Desert Springs Medical Center, 3rd floor, cancer ward, her mother's life support, the machines that went beep 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 with every breath Maria Sinclair did not take on her own anymore. After that, silence. Sofia reached across the darkness and felt for her pocket. $2 bills. 6 quarters. $5.50 stood between her and nothing. She lay there for 4 minutes counting her breathing, then dressed in the dark. The uniform went on like armor, like a second skin that made her invisible. Black shoes laced tight. Hair pinned back so severely it pulled at her temples. At 4:15 in the morning she entered the main estate through the service entrance, a steel door that closed behind her with a soft click like the sound of a lock turning. The marble floors of the south wing waited. 17 trash cans waited. She knelt and began to scrub, her knees pressing into the cold stone, her hands red and raw from 3 years of cleaning other people's homes, other people's messes, other people's lives. The water in her bucket turned grey. The brush bristles wore thin. Around her the Calabrese Estate woke and moved like she was not there. A housekeeper walked past without looking. A cook set down a plate of scrambled eggs on the counter, not for her but for the family, and left it there like an offering to a ghost. At 9:30 in the morning, a small voice said, "You're the park lady." Sofia turned. Emma Calabrese stood in the hallway in a yellow sundress, 7 years old, her hair in braids, her eyes bright with recognition. 3 weeks earlier, Sofia had been walking through Henderson Park on her only day off, the single day each week when she was not scrubbing or waiting tables. She had seen the girl climb higher and higher on the metal structure, seen the moment her grip slipped. She had run without thinking, stayed with the child while waiting for the ambulance, held her hand and whispered that everything would be okay even though she did not believe it. Then she disappeared before anyone could ask her name, before she could become real to them. Now Emma was real, and she was pointing at Sofia with a joy that made Sofia's chest hurt. "Sure," Sofia whispered. "I'm just the maid." She turned away and kept scrubbing, her movements faster now, desperate to become invisible again. Emma's footsteps faded down the hallway. At 11 in the morning, Sofia clocked out of the Calabrese Estate. She took the bus for 40 minutes through Las Vegas toward the east side of the city, toward the Mirage Diner on Charleston Boulevard. The bus smelled like diesel and tired people. She counted the stops. She counted the money in her pocket again even though the numbers had not changed. The diner was checkered linoleum, cracked red vinyl booths, neon beer signs humming against the walls like trapped insects. The smell of burnt coffee and grease had soaked into everything, the walls, the curtains, her hair, her dreams. Sofia changed into her pink waitress uniform in the back bathroom, looking at herself in the mirror for half a second before she looked away. Then she clocked in for the graveyard shift. Douglas Hale was waiting. He always was. He was 42 years old, thinning brown hair, a coffee-stained polo shirt, and eyes that moved across her body like he was deciding which part to take first. His name tag said manager. His voice said something else entirely. "You're late," he said at 1 o'clock, blocking her path near the dish station. The fryer sizzled behind him. "That's coming out of your pay." She had not been late. She had arrived at 11:58. "I clocked in at 11:58, Sofia said quietly. "My clock says different." He smiled. It was the smile of a man who had never been told no, never faced a consequence, never learned that actions have weight. 75 cents this time. Sofia had earned $32 for that shift. Now she would earn $31.25. She nodded and moved past him, felt his shoulder graze hers deliberately as she passed. The touch made her skin crawl like insects were under her clothes. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Evelyn Blackwell arrived. She was the owner, 60 years old, dressed in a designer pantsuit in cream and camel, her hair cut short and severe, her nails manicured and sharp. She surveyed the diner like a general surveying a battlefield where she had already won. Her eyes landed on Sofia. "The booths in Section 3 need rewashing," Evelyn announced, loud enough for customers to hear. "This is why we can't hire people off the street. They simply don't know how to maintain basic standards." Sofia was not hired off the street. She had worked there for 8 months. But she said nothing. She took her rag and her bucket and re-washed the booths while 3 customers watched and understood, without being told, that Sofia was the kind of person who deserved this treatment, that something about her made her suitable for cruelty. Hour after hour. Tables turned over. Plates came back half-eaten. Tips disappeared into Douglas's pocket while Sofia's hands moved, her feet moved, her mouth said thank you and I'll be right back and have a wonderful evening. Around her the world moved on. People sat with their families, their partners, their friends. They held hands across the checkered tables. They laughed. Sofia moved between them like water, like air, like nothing that mattered. At 9 o'clock that evening, something changed. A black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot. The engine cut. 3 men emerged, not from the car, but from somewhere behind it, from other vehicles, from the darkness beyond the neon. They were dressed in suits that cost more than Sofia made in 2 months. They moved with purpose, with coordination, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been questioned. One of them held the diner door open. A fourth man stepped inside. He was tall. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the kind of suit you saw in magazines about people who owned cities. His hair was dark, slicked back, and his eyes were the color of a storm cloud. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone like someone had drawn a line with a knife and decided it should stay. He took a booth in the back corner. The other men positioned themselves nearby, close enough to be useful, far enough away to give him space. The diner went quiet. Not the natural quiet of business, but the kind of quiet that happens when a predator enters a room and every smaller creature holds its breath. Douglas Hale appeared immediately, his posture changed, his voice different. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Mirage. Can I get you anything?" The man did not look at him. He was looking at the menu. "Coffee," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. Like something spoken in a church that would be binding forever. Sofia found herself moving toward his booth. Her legs carried her without permission. The coffee pot was heavy in her hands. She approached the table and her voice came out quiet and careful. "Coffee?" she asked. He looked up. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, something happened that she could not name and could not explain. He saw her. Not past her, not through her, but saw her, really saw her, in a way no one had looked at her in years. It was like being recognized after a lifetime of invisibility. "Yes," he said. "And whatever you recommend for dinner." "The roast beef is fresh today," Sofia said. "Then I'll have that." She poured his coffee. His hands were large, with gold rings on 2 fingers and a watch that cost more than her mother's surgery. She saw the edge of a tattoo on his wrist, dark and intricate, visible beneath his cuff. As she turned to leave, Douglas Hale stepped in front of her near the register. "That's Giovanni Calabrese," he whispered, his voice changed now, smaller. "Do not mess this up, Sofia. Do you understand me? Do not mess this up." Sofia had no idea who Giovanni Calabrese was. But the way Douglas said the name made it clear that whoever he was, Douglas Hale was afraid of him. She moved back to the kitchen. She plated the roast beef with care. She brought it to the table and set it down gently. Giovanni Calabrese looked up at her again. "What is your name?" he asked. "Sofia," she said. "Sofia," he repeated, as if he was memorizing something that mattered. "Do you work here every night?" "Yes, sir." 11 to 3. "Alone?" The question was strange. Simple, but strange. "My manager is here," Sofia said carefully. "Douglas Hale." Something shifted in his expression. Something cold. "Thank you, Sofia," he said. "Your service has been excellent." She left him to his meal. From the register, she watched him eat slowly, deliberately, his attention fully on the food as if nothing else in the world existed. His men watched the door, the windows, the other patrons. They watched everything except him. At 2:45 in the morning, as Sofia was wiping down the last booth, the front door of the diner exploded inward. Not literally. But it felt that way. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the neon, moving with rage, his face twisted and dark. Sofia did not recognize him at first. Then she understood. It was Douglas Hale. But not the Douglas Hale who worked here. This was something else, something true. Behind him came another figure. A woman. Evelyn Blackwell, still in her designer clothes, still moving like she owned the world. "Sofia," Evelyn called out, her voice sharp as a knife. "You left early last Thursday. That's wage theft. You owe the diner $12. Sofia had worked until 3 in the morning that night. She had not left early. But she was too tired to argue. She was always too tired to argue. "I'll pay it back," Sofia whispered. That was when Giovanni Calabrese stood. He had been sitting in his booth the entire time, quiet, still, watching. Now he rose like a king rising from a throne. His men stood with him. The diner contracted around them like a fist closing. Sofia works no longer at the Mirage, Giovanni said, his voice filling every corner of the room. The Mirage, in fact, is no longer a place of business. Effective immediately. Douglas Hale's face went white. Mr. Calabrese, he started. You will speak to no one of this, Giovanni said. You will disappear. Your partner will disappear. You will both learn that some actions carry consequences that money cannot erase. He turned to Sofia. Come, he said. It was not a request. Sofia moved toward him. Behind her, she could feel Douglas Hale shaking. Could feel Evelyn Blackwell's shock like an electric current. As she passed them, as she walked toward the tall man in the charcoal suit who had somehow, in less than an hour, destroyed her abusers, she felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. But hope, she was learning, was its own kind of danger. Sofia opens her eyes in the darkness of Giovanni's private study and realizes she has never been alone with him like this before. The leather chair across from her is empty now. He had excused himself 20 minutes ago to take a call, his jaw tightening as he listened to whatever news Bruno was delivering through the phone. The study is vast and silent, walls lined with books he has probably never read, a desk made of mahogany that costs more than she earned in 2 years. On that desk sits a single photograph in a silver frame. Emma, laughing, her small hand reaching for the camera. Sofia stands and moves closer, unable to help herself. The child's joy radiates from the image like sunlight through glass. She thinks of that moment in the garden, how Emma had hugged her without hesitation, without knowing that Sofia was nobody, that Sofia was temporary, that Sofia was borrowed from a life that was still collapsing. The door opens without warning. Giovanni enters, and something in his bearing has shifted. His suit is still pristine, charcoal grey with threads of silver, his white shirt still immaculate, but his eyes have changed. They burn with a cold, controlled fury that makes her step backward. Sit, he says. It is not unkind, but it is absolute. Sofia sits. The leather chair holds her like a throne she does not deserve. Giovanni moves to the window, his hands clasped behind his back, and for a long moment he says nothing. The silence stretches like a nerve pulled tight. Tell me everything, he finally says, his voice low. Every detail about Douglas Hale. Every word he said to you. Every time his hands touched you. Every lie Evelyn Blackwell told about you in that diner. I want to know it all. Sofia's throat tightens. She has spent 8 months learning to make herself smaller, quieter, less. She has become an expert at swallowing her own story. But Giovanni's patience is the kind that cannot be refused, and something in his stillness demands the truth like a blade demands blood. She tells him about the first day Douglas hired her, how he had leaned against the counter and smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. She tells him about the tips he stole, the overtime he forced, how he would stand too close when she was cleaning the grease trap, his breath hot on her neck. She tells him about Evelyn Blackwell's public humiliations, the way she would dock Sofia's pay for mistakes she never made, the rumors she spread about Sofia stealing from the register. She tells him about the night Douglas cornered her in the storage room, his hands closing around her throat, the panic that exploded through her chest like shattered glass. Giovanni listens without moving. When she finishes, when her voice has dried up like a well running empty, he turns from the window. 3 days, he says. You have been away from that place for 3 days. And in that time, Douglas Hale has called looking for you 14 times. Evelyn Blackwell has called 7 times. They are not worried about you, Sofia. They are worried about their investment walking away. Sofia's stomach clenches. She had not understood it in those terms, but hearing it now, the truth lands like a hammer. She was never an employee. She was an asset. A resource to be drained until empty. I have already made calls, Giovanni continues, moving toward his desk. I have learned that Douglas Hale has a record. 3 women reported him to the police between 2019 and 2021. All three dropped their charges when he threatened to destroy them. No official documentation remains, but Bruno knows someone in the department who still remembers. He sits, his movements deliberate as a predator settling. Evelyn Blackwell is running that diner on borrowed money. She owes $370,000 to people who do not accept missed payments. She has 6 weeks, maybe 7, before her creditors come calling. Sofia does not understand what he is telling her. She does not understand what any of this means. What I am telling you, Giovanni says, reading her silence, is that the people who hurt you are already falling. I did not push them. I simply let gravity do its work. But if you want them destroyed completely, Sofia, I can arrange that. I can ensure Douglas Hale spends the next 15 years in federal prison. I can ensure Evelyn Blackwell loses everything she has built and dies knowing she has nothing. He pauses, letting his words settle. But this choice is yours. Not mine. Yours. Sofia's hands are shaking. She presses them flat against her thighs to steady them. In her entire life, no one has ever asked her what she wanted. Survival has always been about accepting what was given, enduring what was inflicted, shrinking to make room for other people's desires. The idea that she has a choice, that her preference matters, that Giovanni would ask her instead of simply taking action, it unmakes her completely. I don't want to hurt them, she whispers. I just want them to never touch anyone again. Giovanni nods slowly. Then that is what will happen. The sound of his phone vibrating cuts through the study like a knife through silence. He glances at the screen and his expression hardens. He stands and walks to the door. Stay here, he says. And Sofia? Lock the door after I leave. Do not open it for anyone but Bruno or Dario. Where are you going? The question escapes before she can stop it. To handle what needs handling. He is already moving, his men materializing in the hallway beyond like shadows given form. She hears Bruno's voice, urgent and clipped, the storage room. He was alone when the system went down. We found blood on the shelving. Giovanni's response is impossible to hear, but his footsteps fade fast, decisive, the sound of a man moving toward something violent. Sofia stands in the study, alone except for Emma's photograph on the desk, and understands that she has just set something in motion. She does not know what. She only knows that the man who brought her into his home, who paid for her mother's treatment, who asked her permission before acting on her behalf, that man has just stepped into the darkness with his fury, and whatever happens next will be because she told him the truth. She moves to the window and sees black Mercedes SUVs pulling out of the gates, engines growling like waking predators. 3 vehicles. 4 men in each. 12 men dressed in charcoal suits and silence, moving through the Las Vegas night toward the Mirage Diner where Douglas Hale is probably still counting his stolen tips, believing himself untouchable. Believing that Sofia was nobody important enough to matter. By morning, everything would change. But Sofia does not know this yet. She only knows that for the first time in her life, someone chose to fight for her without asking for repayment. And she is terrified of what that might cost him. The black Mercedes SUVs cut through the Las Vegas night like sharks moving through dark water, their engines a low growl that seemed to shake the pavement beneath them. Inside the lead vehicle, Giovanni Calabrese sat in perfect stillness, his tailored charcoal suit unmarked by the world outside, his jaw set like carved stone. His men, Bruno in the passenger seat, Dario in the back, exchanged no words. They had learned long ago that silence was how Giovanni prepared for violence. The Mirage Diner glowed under fluorescent lights at 3 in the morning, its parking lot nearly empty except for Douglas Hale's rusted sedan parked near the service entrance. Douglas was inside, counting the register for the 3rd time, his weathered face creased with concentration. He had been stealing from Sofia for 8 months. $50 here, $30 there, the small cruelties of a man who knew she was too afraid to fight back. He did not see the vehicles arrive. He did not see the 12 men in black suits emerge like shadows given substance, their movement synchronized, economical, the practiced grace of people who had done this before. Douglas locked the diner at 3:17 and walked toward his car, keys jingling in his trembling hand. Something in the air had changed. The temperature. The quality of silence. His breath came shorter. Giovanni stepped from behind the delivery truck before Douglas could reach his door. Douglas Hale. Giovanni's voice was soft, which made it worse. Soft voices carried more weight than shouts. You put your hands on someone under my protection. Douglas's face went white, a bleaching of color that started at his hairline and drained downward. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. Giovanni nodded once. Bruno moved with the efficiency of a man who had perfected violence into an art form. He drove Douglas to his knees on the oil-stained pavement, not with cruelty but with the precise application of force. Douglas's hand scraped against asphalt, drawing blood in thin ribbons. Giovanni crouched down until they were eye level, his dark eyes like the bottom of a well with no bottom. Sofia Sinclair. You remember her now? I didn't. She's nobody. She. You stole from her. Giovanni's voice did not rise. You threatened her. You put your hands on her throat and left bruises like a signature written across her skin. And you did it because you believed she was nobody important enough to matter. Douglas started babbling, a flood of excuses and denials pouring out like blood from a wound. Giovanni cut him off by standing. Dario moved in from the left, blocking any path toward escape. Douglas tried anyway, his desperation making him clumsy, making him slow. Giovanni brushed an invisible particle from his coat sleeve. Death would be too quick, too easy, too merciful for what you've done. You're going to pay a different way. At dawn the FBI arrived at the Mirage Diner with 16 agents and warrants that felt like thunderclaps. They moved through the restaurant methodically, seizing computers, searching the back office, photographing the register Douglas had falsified. They found everything Giovanni had arranged for them to find: 8 employees whose wages he had stolen, for women he had harassed, 2 years of cooked books that screamed fraud. They arrested Douglas at 6:47 in the morning, cameras rolling, his face twisted in the headlights of a dozen news vans. Federal prison, 40 years, no parole. The sentence was read aloud by a federal judge in a courtroom where Sofia watched from the back row, her mother beside her, both of them silent as stone. Giovanni watched the broadcast from his study with Sofia beside him on the leather sofa, her small hand steady in his larger one. He did not smile. This was not victory. This was accounting. But Evelyn Blackwell remained untouched. She sat in her penthouse office on the 32nd floor of the Blackwell building, reading articles about Douglas Hale's arrest with a satisfied smile. Sofia Sinclair was nobody. The girl would disappear, would move on, would eventually vanish into whatever poverty hole she had crawled out of. Evelyn had been doing this for 12 years, building restaurants, extracting maximum profit from minimum wage workers, crushing anyone who dared to complain. That afternoon Giovanni made 3 phone calls. The first was to a contact at the Internal Revenue Service, a man who owed him a favor from a situation best left unspoken. The second was to the Nevada Labor Commission, where he had cultivated a relationship over years of careful investment. The third was to a journalist at the Las Vegas Review who had written favorable stories about his legitimate businesses and understood that Giovanni Calabrese remembered his friends. By evening the walls began to close in on Evelyn Blackwell. Audits materialized from the IRS. Investigations opened at the Labor Commission. Interviews began with 16 former employees who all told the same story: abuse, theft, humiliation, wages docked for imagined mistakes, tips stolen, shifts extended without pay. The next morning federal agents arrived at Blackwell Holdings with warrants stamped in blue ink. They arrested Evelyn in her office at 9 o'clock, cameras crowding the lobby, her face twisted in fury and disbelief as agents walked her out in handcuffs. She screamed that she had done nothing wrong, that it was all fabrication, that Sofia Sinclair was a liar and a thief and a whore. No one heard her. The cameras were already moving to the next shot. Her empire collapsed in 72 hours. Restaurants seized by federal order. Assets frozen. Her reputation destroyed on every news outlet in Nevada, her face on television next to headlines about labor trafficking and wage theft. Federal prison, 40 years, the same cell block where Douglas Hale was already learning that the world had consequences. But before the raids, before the arrests, before the vindication that should have felt like salvation, Sofia stood alone in the estate gardens at 2 in the morning, rain starting to fall again, a cold summer storm soaking through her borrowed clothes. She held the final notice letter in shaking hands even though the debt was paid, even though her mother was safe in a hospital recovery ward, because the terror of those months had carved itself into her bones like a scar that would not fade. The letter was creased and worn, and she read it again even though she had memorized every word. She thought, this is not real. This will be taken away. I am still nobody. I am still invisible. The rain came harder. Her knees buckled and she sat on the wet grass, the cold soaking through her pajama pants, and she was so tired of fighting. She thought about leaving, about disappearing before Giovanni realized she was not worth saving. She thought about all the people who had left her, her father, the customers who called her stupid, Douglas who treated her like an animal, Evelyn who looked through her like she was made of glass. She held the final notice letter and let it dissolve in the rain. Then a small voice behind her, "Are you okay?" Sofia turned and Emma was there in pink pajamas and yellow rain boots, holding a child-sized umbrella with cartoon rabbits on it. The 7-year-old sat beside her in the grass, shared the umbrella, and said, "Papa says you are brave." "I think so too." That one moment, a child choosing to sit in the rain with her when she could have stayed inside where it was warm, pulled Sofia back from the edge of the abyss. She was not alone. She was seen. She was chosen by someone who did not need to choose her. When Giovanni found them 10 minutes later, soaked and shivering, he did not ask questions. He wrapped them both in his cashmere coat, its fabric worth more than her old monthly rent, and carried Emma inside. He returned for Sofia, lifting her with the gentleness of a man soothing a lost child. "You are not going anywhere," he said. "You are home." The word hung in the air between them like a prayer finally answered. Sofia stands in the rain outside the Calabrese Estate, the final notice letter dissolving in her trembling hands. Her left eye is swollen shut, handprint bruises darkening her throat like accusations written in shadow. She cannot breathe without pain. She cannot see clearly. She cannot imagine a tomorrow. The rain tastes like copper and salt and the end of everything. She thinks about the $35,000 owed in 3 days, a number so enormous it exists only in nightmares and debt collectors' ledgers. She has $5 in her pocket. $5 separates her from absolute nothing. Then footsteps approach. Measured, unhurried, deliberately slow. Giovanni Calabrese emerges from the darkness like a man who has never needed to hide from anything. He is tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a wool coat that costs more than Sofia has earned in 6 months of double shifts. His eyes are storm grey and burning with something she cannot name. A thin scar runs from his left eye to his cheekbone like a map of violence survived. When he sees her bloodied and broken on the wet grass, something shifts in his face, something ancient and protective that his own men have never witnessed. He does not ask questions. He moves toward her like a general approaching a lost soldier, and his voice emerges deep and solid like an oath. "You work in my house," he says. Not a question. An observation spoken with certainty. Sofia tries to speak. Her throat produces only a shattered whisper. "My name is Sofia." "I am," but she cannot finish. She is too broken. Too tired. Too convinced that she does not deserve mercy. Giovanni removes his coat, the cashmere coat worth more than a year of her old rent, and wraps it around her shaking shoulders. His hands are gentle. This surprises her. His hands should be weapons. Instead, they are careful, deliberate, the hands of a man soothing a lost child. "You are not going anywhere," he says. "You are home." That one word, home, shatters something inside her that has been holding together through sheer force of will. What Sofia does not know in that moment is that Giovanni has been watching her for 3 weeks. Not hunting her. Watching. protecting from a distance. He saw her save his daughter Emma in the park when the child fell from the monkey bars. He watched Sofia stay with the crying 7-year-old, holding her hand, singing softly, refusing to leave even though she did not know who Emma was, even though she had nothing to gain. He did not approach her then because he wanted to understand this invisible woman who had enough kindness left inside herself to pour it out for a stranger's child. Now, as he carries her into the estate, her body light as something that has forgotten how to weigh anything, he realizes he has been waiting for this moment. The moment when her breaking point would finally arrive. 3 weeks earlier, Sofia had been walking home from the Mirage Diner at 11:48 p.m. Her manager Douglas Hale had cornered her in the storage room with his hands reaching toward her like tentacles. His breath smelled like whiskey and entitlement. He had stolen her tips all week, $87 that belonged to her, and when she asked for it back, he grabbed her throat and whispered promises of violence into her ear. She had fought him with the desperation of someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to survive for. She had driven her elbow backward and heard his nose crack. She had run. She had not slept since. Giovanni learns this by midnight. His security team has already compiled 17 pages of documentation on Douglas Hale, the Mirage Diner, and Evelyn Blackwell, the restaurant's owner who publicly humiliates her staff and calls the police if they complain. By 1 a.m., he knows Douglas Hale's home address, his outstanding debts, his criminal history of assault charges that were quietly settled. By 2 a.m., he knows Evelyn Blackwell has been stealing from her own restaurant for 8 years, money laundering through a shell corporation in Reno. But Giovanni does not move yet. Instead, he sits beside Sofia's bed in the guest suite of his mansion. Emma is asleep in the chair by the window, curled into the oversized leather like a small animal seeking safety. Sofia drifts in and out of consciousness, her body wrapped in ice packs, her throat treated with salve that reduces the bruising. When she wakes, Giovanni is there. When she cries, silent, shattered crying that comes from a place deeper than tears, he does not look away. He bears witness. This is what the people who depend on him have learned over 15 years. Giovanni Calabrese's presence is a form of protection that does not require words. At 3:15 a.m., Sofia wakes from a nightmare of falling. Her hands flail and Giovanni catches them gently, holds them steady against her own chest. "You are safe," he says. "No one will hurt you again. You have my word." His voice is like thunder wrapped in ice. She wants to believe him. She is terrified to believe him. "Why?" she whispers. "I am nobody." Giovanni's eyes narrow. He leans closer and his voice drops lower. "Because the people who did this believed you were nobody. Because they looked at you and saw something disposable. Something that could be used and discarded. That belief needs to be corrected." He pauses. His hand touches her hair, careful, as if she might shatter. "And because you sat in the rain with my daughter when you could have run. Because you chose to stay." That morning, Sofia stands in the kitchen of the Calabrese Estate wearing a soft sweater and jeans, not the black and white uniform that made her invisible. Emma is beside her, standing on a wooden stepping stool, her small hands working to flip pancakes. The child is laughing. Pure, unbroken laughter that sounds like survival. "Higher, Sofia. You gotta flip it higher or it falls apart." Emma demonstrates with her whole body, bouncing slightly as the pancake arcs through the air and lands perfectly in the pan. "You are a natural," Sofia says, and the words come from somewhere genuine inside her, somewhere that is still capable of joy. Bruno walks through the kitchen at 7:33 a.m., pouring coffee into a thick ceramic mug, and his eyes flicker across Sofia with surprise. In 5 years of working at the estate, she has never sat at the table. She has never worn civilian clothes. She has never looked anything other than exhausted. "Boss wants to see you in the study when you're done," he says. His tone is neutral, no threat, no urgency, just information passed from one person to another like a normal thing. Sofia's chest tightens. She thinks, this is the moment. He will send me away. I was too broken. I will be discarded. The study smells like leather and expensive wooden decisions. Giovanni sits behind his desk with paperwork spread before him like evidence. When he looks up, Sofia realizes she has been holding her breath. "Close the door," he says, and she does, her hands shaking. He slides a folder across the marble desk. It is heavier than it should be. Sofia opens it and the words swim in front of her eyes. Enrollment forms. UNLV. Full scholarship. Housing included. Course selection. Financial aid. A future written in black ink on official letterhead. She stares at it and cannot speak. "I can't accept this," she whispers. "I don't deserve." Giovanni stands and walks around the desk in that deliberate way of his, each movement controlled, purposeful. "You already earned it," he says. His voice fills the room like something solid. "You saved my daughter. You survived hell and stayed kind. That is worth more than money. That is worth more than anything." He pauses. The scar on his face catches the light. "My father broke my ribs when I was 8 years old because I cried about hunger. At 15, I fought back and nearly killed him. I built everything I have because I swore I would never be helpless again. But you, Sofia, you were helpless, and you chose to be kind anyway. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand how rare that is?" Sofia's eyes fill with tears. She does not try to stop them. "I don't know how to be anything other than invisible," she says. Giovanni steps closer. His hand reaches out and touches her chin gently, tilting her face up to meet his. "Then let me teach you," he says. "You taught Emma that someone will stay when she is scared. Let me teach you that you are worth staying for." That evening, the household gathers for dinner, Giovanni and Emma and Sofia and Bruno and Dario and Mrs. Chen, who has cooked since before Giovanni's rise to power. Sofia sits at the table instead of serving it. Emma insists on the seat directly beside her, and the child holds her hand under the table. Giovanni raises a glass at 6:53 p.m., and the sound of crystal clinking through the room is clean and clear. "To Sofia," he says. Every eye turns toward her. "To family." The men echo the toast. Bruno nods slowly, understanding something has fundamentally shifted. Dario smiles. Mrs. Chen dabs her eyes with a napkin and whispers a prayer in Cantonese for blessings and protection. Later, Giovanni walks Sofia to the garden. The summer night is warm, stars scattered across the sky like promises written in light. Under the stone archway covered in climbing jasmine, he tells her about the father who broke him, about the years of building power, about the moment he realized that control without purpose is just another form of prison. Sofia tells him about dropping out of college to care for her mother, about the year that became 5 years, about the shame of needing help when the world teaches you that asking is weakness. "You saved me too," Giovanni says. His voice is steady, but there is something underneath it, something that sounds like truth. "You reminded me why I built all this. Not for power. For protection. For the people who need it." Sofia's voice does not shake when she responds. "Then we saved each other." The rain begins as they stand in the garden, soft at first, then harder, the same storm that tried to drown her weeks ago now falling on both of them equally. Neither moves to go inside. 3 days later, at 11:22 p.m., Douglas Hale is arrested outside his apartment. Federal agents in dark windbreakers walk him to a black SUV with his hands cuffed behind his back. He does not resist. He is screaming, begging, offering information about Evelyn Blackwell in exchange for mercy. There is no mercy. 2 hours later, Evelyn Blackwell is arrested at her home. Her employees give statements. Her accounting records are seized. Her reputation, built over 20 years of social standing and careful connections, crumbles in less than 48 hours. She will spend 40 years in federal prison. She will die in a cell, forgotten, her name a footnote to a story about a woman she thought was invisible. 6 months later, Sofia walks across the UNLV campus with textbooks under her arm. Her mother, Margaret Sinclair, recovered and radiant after months of proper medical care, meets her for lunch at a cafe on campus. Giovanni and Emma are there too. Emma has picked flowers and placed them in Sofia's hair. Margaret takes Giovanni's hand, and her voice shakes with gratitude. "Thank you for seeing my daughter when the world made her invisible," she says. Giovanni shakes his head. "She was never invisible," he replies. "We were just too blind to look." In the estate library on a quiet afternoon, Sofia sits on the leather couch reading to Emma. The rain patters against the windows. Giovanni watches from the doorway, Bruno beside him, and his lieutenant says quietly, "You gave her a life, boss." Giovanni does not respond for a long moment. Then, "No. She gave me a reason to use mine for something that matters." Emma looks up, sees them watching, and waves with both hands. "Papa, come read with us. We are at the best part." Giovanni crosses the room and sits beside Sofia, and she leans her head on his shoulder, not as a maid, not as a debt owed, but as someone chosen and choosing in return. Douglas Hale serves 40 years in federal prison. Evelyn Blackwell serves 40 years in federal prison. Sofia Sinclair graduates with honors, becomes a victim's advocate, and lives in the East Wing of the Calabrese Estate with her mother in the guest suite. Giovanni's empire continues, but now he also runs something else, a foundation that pays medical debts for families in crisis, named after a woman who had $5 in her pocket and chose to sit with a frightened child in a park. Because family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. If this story moved your heart, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that in the darkest moments, someone might be watching, someone might be coming, someone might choose to stay. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will break you open and put you back together. And remember, you are never as invisible as the world wants you to believe. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you in the next video. Goodbye.